At 7:45 every morning, she unlocked the same classroom door, adjusted the chalk tray, and greeted children by name. Parents trusted her. Colleagues admired her calm discipline. To the neighborhood, she was just another devoted schoolteacher shaping young minds. But behind her quiet smile was a woman trained to disappear, to observe without being seen, and to wait patiently for the precise moment when a single decision could alter the course of history. Her lesson plan was not written on paper, and her final exam had only one target. In the world of intelligence, the most dangerous operatives are rarely the ones carrying weapons. They are the ones who blend so completely into ordinary life that even suspicion forgets to look their way. For MOSSAD, Israel's intelligence service, this truth had been refined into doctrine over decades of covert operations across hostile territory. And among all disguises ever used, few were more effective than one that symbolized trust, innocence, and routine: a schoolteacher. Her real name was known to only a handful of people inside a windowless building in Tel Aviv. Even within MOSSAD, identities were fragmented, compartmentalized, and deliberately incomplete. To one department she was a linguistic specialist. To another, a behavioral analyst. To the operations division, she was simply an asset with an unusual profile, someone capable of sustained emotional control over long periods of deep cover. She had not joined MOSSAD dreaming of danger or glory. Her recruitment began quietly, almost accidentally, during her university years. A professor recommended her for a government language program. That program led to interviews. The interviews led to assessments. The assessments uncovered something rare: a woman who could convincingly inhabit a role without losing herself inside it. Training did not begin with weapons or surveillance. It began with erasure. They stripped away habits first: how she walked, how she reacted when surprised, how long she held eye contact. Instructors corrected the smallest gestures. A raised eyebrow could betray confidence. A steady gaze could seem unnatural. She learned how to appear average, forgettable, safe. Next came cultural immersion, not the kind learned from books, but the kind absorbed through repetition. She memorized local idioms, regional accents, childhood songs, even outdated slang no one her age would normally know. MOSSAD wanted her to sound as if she had grown up there, shaped by the same social rhythms as the people around her. Only after months of psychological conditioning did they introduce the cover identity. She would be a schoolteacher. Not a university lecturer. Not a private tutor. A primary-level teacher in a modest neighborhood. Someone who interacted daily with families, administrators, shopkeepers, and local officials. Someone who had a reason to ask questions without raising alarms. Someone who could observe patterns over years without seeming intrusive. The target, at this stage, was still abstract. MOSSAD never revealed full operational objectives too early. She was told only this: a high-value individual operated within the region, shielded by community ties and routine. Traditional surveillance had failed. Electronic methods were compromised. Human access was the only remaining path. Her role would be to build proximity, not through seduction or force, but through trust. The cover required patience. Years, not months. She was sent abroad under a civilian passport built layer by layer with real records, real gaps, and real history. There were school transcripts, medical files, social media traces, even old photographs staged years in advance. If someone dug into her past, they would find something reassuringly boring. The town where she arrived was unremarkable. That was precisely the point. It sat close enough to strategic routes to matter, yet far enough from borders to feel safe. The kind of place where strangers were noticed at first, then forgotten once they became routine. She applied for a teaching position under her cover name, armed with authentic-looking credentials and references that could withstand scrutiny. The interview was simple. Her calm demeanor, fluent language, and understated confidence made her an easy hire. Within weeks, she had her own classroom. From the outside, her life followed a predictable rhythm. Morning lessons, afternoon grading, occasional staff meetings filled with complaints about budgets and curriculum changes. She attended school events, drank tea with other teachers, and listened more than she spoke. But beneath that routine was constant awareness. Every interaction was logged mentally. Which parents lingered too long after pickup? Which teachers avoided certain topics? Which names caused subtle shifts in conversation? Intelligence gathering at this level was not about secrets whispered in dark rooms. It was about patterns hiding in plain sight. She never asked direct questions. Instead, she let people talk. People always did. Children were especially revealing. They repeated conversations they overheard at home, unaware of their significance. A careless remark about a relative's important work. A complaint about sudden travel. A name mentioned too often, with too much respect or fear. Slowly, fragments began to align. There was one family whose name surfaced repeatedly, not loudly, but persistently. The children were polite, well-dressed, and unusually cautious in what they shared. Their parents were respected, yet rarely present at public events. When they did appear, conversations shifted subtly, as if an invisible line had been drawn. MOSSAD handlers, communicating through carefully timed and disguised channels, instructed her to observe only. No contact, no probing, just watch. Months turned into a year. Her cover deepened. She became one of us. Parents trusted her with concerns beyond academics. Teachers confided frustrations. Shopkeepers recognized her and asked about her students. The town absorbed her into its fabric. And within that fabric, the outline of her real mission began to sharpen. The target was not a soldier or a politician in the traditional sense. He was something more dangerous, a facilitator, a connector, someone who made other operations possible while remaining publicly invisible. Removing him would not make headlines, but it would quietly collapse an entire network. Access to him was limited. He avoided predictable routines. He trusted few outsiders. But he trusted the community. And he trusted the institutions that shaped its children, including the school. By the end of her first year, she was no longer just a teacher. She was a fixture, a known quantity, a person beyond suspicion, which was exactly when the operation truly began. By the second year, the rhythm of her cover life had settled so deeply into place that even she sometimes felt its pull. The classroom was no longer a stage, it had become a lived reality. She knew which students struggled silently, which parents argued behind closed doors, and which families projected respectability to hide fractures underneath. That intimacy was not an accident, it was the soil MOSSAD had counted on. Trust, once earned through consistency, created access no forged document ever could. The first indirect proximity to the target came without ceremony. It arrived as a routine parent-teacher interaction, unremarkable to anyone else. He did not introduce himself with importance, nor did he linger. He listened more than he spoke, asked precise questions about curriculum and discipline, and maintained a polite emotional distance. To her trained eye, that distance was not disinterest, it was control. People like him did not waste energy. They conserved it. She did nothing different that day. No extended eye contact. No attempt to impress. She treated him exactly as she treated every other parent. MOSSAD doctrine emphasized this moment above all others. The first encounter must feel forgettable. Suspicion rarely attaches itself to what seems routine. From that point forward, she adjusted nothing outwardly, yet internally her awareness sharpened. She noted patterns rather than events. How often his children were absent. Who picked them up when he did not. The subtle difference in their behavior before and after certain weekends. None of it was actionable alone, but intelligence was never built from single facts. It was built from accumulation. Her handlers sent brief, coded prompts through benign-seeming channels. Questions that looked like casual check-ins but were designed to steer her attention. Was there increased security awareness around the school? Any unfamiliar faces lingering too long? Any sudden changes in staff behavior? She answered sparingly, always aware that over-reporting could be as dangerous as silence. What made her position powerful was also what made it fragile. A teacher was expected to care, not to pry. She had to remain emotionally present without becoming personally entangled. That balance was tested when the target's child began staying after class. At first it was academic, extra help with reading. Then it became habitual. The child spoke carefully, as if trained to measure words, yet occasionally let small details slip. Names, places, references to travel that did not match the family's public routine. She redirected gently every time, never pressing. Children sensed pressure instinctively. Instead, she let pauses do the work. Silence invited speech. Over weeks, fragments formed a quiet map, not of actions, but of environment. Where the family felt safe. Where they did not. Which routines were flexible, and which were rigidly protected. Outside the classroom, her cover expanded. She volunteered for school committees, attended local functions, and accepted invitations she would have declined in real life. Each appearance reinforced her legitimacy. Each conversation broadened her understanding of the social ecosystem shielding her target. This was not a man hiding in shadows. He was hiding in plain sight, protected by normalcy. The danger escalated subtly. Once, she noticed a man across the street watching the school entrance for too long. Another time, she felt the unmistakable shift in a conversation when her name entered it. These were not confirmations, only signals. In intelligence work, signals mattered more than proof. Proof came later, often too late. Her instructions remained unchanged. Do not rush. The mission's success depended on timing, not bravery. MOSSAD did not need her to act yet. They needed her to remain invisible while narrowing the distance between observer and objective. By the end of part 2 of her mission, she had achieved something more valuable than access. She had achieved predictability. The target no longer adjusted behavior when she was present. His guard, trained for threats that looked like threats, had failed to recognize the danger of familiarity. And familiarity, she knew, was the most lethal disguise of all. As the third phase unfolded, the operation shifted from passive observation to controlled influence, though nothing about her outward behavior changed. To the town, she was still the same dependable teacher. To MOSSAD, she was now a live conduit, someone positioned close enough to subtly shape circumstances without leaving fingerprints. This was the most delicate stage, where success depended on restraint as much as action. The opportunity emerged through routine bureaucracy. A curriculum update required parent participation, workshops, and informal meetings between staff and families. It was the kind of administrative burden most people ignored, which made it perfect. She volunteered to coordinate portions of it, not out of ambition, but convenience. The role gave her a legitimate reason to interact more frequently with parents, including the target, without appearing to single anyone out. Their conversations remained surface level. Education, discipline, future prospects. Yet beneath those topics ran an undercurrent she could feel growing stronger: recognition. He now knew her by name without checking records. He trusted her judgment about his children. Trust did not announce itself loudly, it settled quietly, like furniture no one thought to move. Behind the scenes, MOSSAD analysts began correlating her reports with external intelligence. Travel windows aligned. Communication blackouts matched her observations of unusual absences. What she was providing was not confirmation of guilt, but validation of patterns others could not see from afar. Human intelligence was filling the blind spots technology could not penetrate. Pressure increased when she realized she was being evaluated, not officially, but socially. Casual questions came her way from people loosely connected to the target's orbit. Where was she from originally? Why had she chosen this town? How long did she plan to stay? None of the questions were aggressive, but together they formed a diagnostic test. Someone, somewhere, was measuring risk. She responded with inconsistency by design. Small, human imperfections. Minor contradictions that could be explained by memory lapses or stress. Perfect stories were suspicious. Real people forgot details. MOSSAD had trained her for this. Believability lived in flaws, not precision. The closest call came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as the school emptied, the target arrived early to pick up his child. They were alone in the classroom longer than usual. The silence stretched, not awkward, but intentional. He studied the walls, the drawings, the schedule board. Then he asked a question that was too sharp to be casual, too soft to be a threat. Do you ever think about leaving? The question was layered. Leaving the school, leaving the town, leaving something else entirely. She answered without hesitation, because hesitation would have been fatal. She spoke about stability, about how children needed consistency, about how some places felt like they chose you rather than the other way around. It was the truth, carefully selected. He nodded. The moment passed, but something had shifted. That night, her handler sent a message shorter than any before. Proximity confirmed. The meaning was clear. She was now close enough that any mistake would ripple outward. Surveillance, once distant, could turn inward. Deep cover operations rarely failed in dramatic explosions. They failed through erosion, small doubts accumulating until someone decided to look closer. From that point on, her personal discipline tightened. No unnecessary movements. No emotional deviations. Even fatigue had to be managed. Exhaustion created patterns, and patterns could be noticed. She slept less, but more intentionally. Ate simply. Maintained the same routes, the same timing, the same expressions. Meanwhile, MOSSAD prepared contingencies she would never see. Extraction routes, emergency narratives, sacrificial distractions if needed, but none of those were plan A. Plan A depended entirely on her remaining exactly where she was. By the end of Part 3, the operation had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer just observing a target. She had entered his psychological perimeter, accepted as part of the environment he believed he understood. And that belief, she knew, was the opening MOSSAD had been waiting for. The operation entered a phase where patience alone was no longer enough. Time itself became an act of pressure, compressing choices and magnifying consequences. She felt it in the smallest disruptions, the way schedules tightened, how conversations shortened when certain names surfaced, how routines that once felt stable now carried faint tremors of alertness. MOSSAD had not told her the timeline, but she knew instinctively that the window was narrowing. The shift began with something deceptively harmless. Increased administrative activity at the school. Inspections, reviews, updated documentation. Processes designed to improve education but perfect for intelligence work. These moments disrupted normal flow, forcing people to adapt, and adaptation revealed priorities. She watched closely as the target subtly restructured his movements around these changes. Pickups became less predictable, communication grew indirect, a protective layer was being tested. Her position placed her at the intersection of order and access. As someone trusted to coordinate logistics, she moved freely through spaces others rarely questioned. She never searched, never lingered where she didn't belong. Instead, she absorbed tone and tension. Some corridors felt neutral, others carried a weight that had nothing to do with children or education. These invisible borders told her more than locked doors ever could. Outside the school, her social integration deepened. Invitations arrived without formality, small gatherings, brief meetings, shared moments that carried no obvious significance. Accepting them was a calculated risk. Declining too often would fracture trust. Accepting too eagerly could raise suspicion. She chose selectively, always erring on the side of seeming ordinary. The most powerful disguise was consistency. One evening gathering proved especially revealing. Nothing was said directly, yet everything was communicated through posture, silence, and spatial awareness. The target positioned himself where sightlines converge. Others deferred subtly, without ceremony. This was not authority imposed, it was authority acknowledged. She recognized it immediately. Power that did not announce itself was the hardest to dismantle. After that night, MOSSAD's messages changed in tone. Still minimal, still coded, but weighted. External assets were aligning. Variables were being reduced. Her role was no longer about discovery, it was about stabilization. She was there to ensure the environment stayed calm long enough for forces beyond her control to move unseen. Rumors began circulating, faint and unsourced. Background checks. External attention. Nothing concrete, but enough to unsettle those already predisposed to caution. She neutralized them the only way possible, by treating them as tedious noise. No urgency, no concern. Her indifference was contagious. In communities, emotion spread faster than facts. By the end of Part 4, the operation had crossed a silent threshold. The target remained unaware of the true danger, yet his world had subtly rearranged itself around a threat he could sense but not identify. And at the center of that rearranged world stood someone he trusted implicitly, never realizing that trust itself had become the most carefully placed element of the entire mission. The operation had reached the point MOSSAD operatives quietly feared more than any other: convergence. All the slow-moving elements, human trust, environmental access, psychological profiling, and external surveillance, were now overlapping. From this stage forward, nothing could be paused or reversed without exposing the entire structure beneath the cover. She felt the change before it was confirmed. The town grew sharper around her, as if edges had been defined overnight. Casual greetings became brief. Conversations ended a second too early. Whether this shift was imagined or real no longer mattered. Perception itself could trigger mistakes. MOSSAD acknowledged the pressure with a single instruction: reduce footprint. Speak less. Be seen, but not noticed. Her role now centered on timing rather than information. MOSSAD did not need more intelligence about the target's identity or importance. That had already been established beyond doubt. What they needed was predictability. A narrow window where his movements, security habits, and emotional state aligned just long enough for decisive action elsewhere. She was not the trigger. She was the metronome. The critical variable turned out to be family routine. Despite all his precautions, the target still structured parts of his life around his children. School events, academic meetings, seasonal programs. These obligations anchored him in time and space more reliably than any electronic trace. Through nothing more than administrative normalcy, she became aware of a future date that repeated itself every year, unaltered, unprotected, and underestimated. She passed the detail on in a message stripped of interpretation. MOSSAD analysts understood immediately. The weight of knowing changed her internal landscape. Until now, her work had felt abstract: patterns, behaviors, confirmations. Now she was aware that people she saw daily existed within the countdown of a larger plan. This was where training mattered most. MOSSAD did not recruit operatives who sought moral certainty. They recruited those who could carry ambiguity without collapsing. Risk increased when the target began appearing unexpectedly. In scheduled pickups, brief appearances during school hours. This was not panic, it was instinct. Something in his environment had shifted enough to activate caution, even if he could not name the threat. The danger was no longer discovery, but deviation. Unpredictable behavior could derail everything. She responded by becoming even more ordinary. She missed nothing important, but she reacted to nothing at all. No visible tension, no heightened alertness. Her calm became a reference point. In human psychology, people unconsciously mirror stability. Without realizing it, the target aligned himself to the rhythm she projected. He returned to routine not because he felt safe, but because nothing around him suggested danger. The most difficult moment came when one of the children asked a question that crossed an invisible line. It was innocent, spoken without intent, but heavy with implication. For a fraction of a second, the answer she gave could have changed the course of the operation. She chose the safest truth possible, one that satisfied curiosity without opening doors. The child accepted it and moved on. She did not sleep that night. MOSSAD's final preparations unfolded beyond her awareness. She was deliberately excluded from details. If she did not know, she could not reveal. Her role was nearing completion, but completion did not mean resolution. Some covers ended with clean extraction. Others ended with continued normalcy, the operative left to live among echoes of what had occurred. By the end of Part 5, the operation was no longer theoretical. The machinery was in motion. The target remained alive, present, and unsuspecting, but only because the most dangerous variable in his environment looked exactly like what it claimed to be. A teacher. She understood something that no training manual ever stated outright. Once an operation reached execution phase, the operative closest to the target became the most isolated person in the room. Information narrowed, communication thinned, silence replaced guidance. MOSSAD had moved beyond preparation, and her value now lay in staying exactly where she was, unchanged, unreactive, and unquestioned. She sensed the moment before she was told. The signals were subtle, routine check-ins ceased, coded confirmations shortened, and then stopped altogether. This was deliberate. In MOSSAD operations, silence often meant alignment. Everything necessary was already in motion. The town continued as usual. Children arrived with backpacks. Teachers complained about schedules. Parents argued politely over grades. The ordinariness felt almost surreal to her now, like standing inside a painting while knowing the frame was about to be removed. She became acutely aware of how fragile normal life truly was, how easily it could be preserved or broken by decisions made far away. The target appeared calmer than he had in weeks. Whatever instincts had stirred earlier had settled. This was the paradox MOSSAD relied on. Sustained caution exhausted itself. Humans could not remain alert forever. Fatigue bred routine, and routine bred vulnerability. He resumed predictable patterns not because the threat had vanished, but because constant vigilance was unsustainable. Her challenge was internal. She could not watch too closely. She could not mark time. She had to inhabit her cover fully, even as she knew the consequences unfolding around her would be permanent. In class, she corrected papers. She smiled at questions. She enforced rules with the same measured tone she always had. The discipline to perform normalcy under this weight was the final test of her training. Then came the day that mattered. Nothing about it stood out. Weather was ordinary. Attendance was average. Conversations were trivial. That was the point. Operations succeeded best when they were hidden inside days no one remembered. She noticed a slight deviation in schedule, small enough to be meaningless to anyone else, but exact enough to confirm MOSSAD's timing had locked in. She did not look for confirmation. She did not wait for news. She understood that her reactions, not events, now carried risk. Instead, she focused on children's voices, on chalk dust, on the mundane tasks that anchored her to the role she had built over years. If history shifted that day, it would do so without her acknowledgement. The emotional impact came later, not as shock, but as release. A tension she had carried unconsciously began to drain away. The environment felt lighter, though nothing visible had changed. That sensation told her more than any message ever could. When communication finally resumed, it was brief and intentionally unsatisfying. No details, no confirmation, just a single directive that signaled closure of her active role. Maintain cover, continue routine, await further instruction. MOSSAD did not congratulate. Survival was the metric, not emotion. She realized then that her greatest danger was not exposure, but emptiness. Deep cover operatives often struggled when the purpose that sustained them dissolved. She had lived a double life for so long that returning to normal felt unnatural. Yet abandoning the cover too quickly would raise questions. So she stayed. Weeks passed. The town adjusted subtly, as communities always did when an unseen pillar disappeared. Names were spoken less often. Schedules changed. Explanations circulated without substance. Life absorbed the absence and moved forward. She remained the same. By the end of Part 6, her mission was effectively complete, though no ceremony marked it. She had not pulled a trigger, issued a command, or made a dramatic choice at the end. Her success lay in endurance, in staying human enough to be trusted, and invisible enough to be lethal without acting. Only one chapter remained. What happens to an operative when the disguise no longer hides danger, but memory? The story did not truly end when she left the classroom behind. That was simply the moment when her visibility to others stopped mattering. What followed was quieter, more internal, and far more difficult to articulate, because deep cover work rarely left scars that could be pointed to or explained. For months after reintegration, she found herself reacting to ordinary life with unnecessary caution. Crowded spaces felt too open. Silence felt loaded. She still noticed exits, rhythms, and inconsistencies without meaning to. MOSSAD psychologists called it residual pattern awareness, a mind trained too long to read danger into details. It faded slowly, not through effort, but through repetition of normality. She returned to teaching briefly, this time under her real name. The irony was not lost on her. Standing in front of a class without a hidden objective felt strange at first, almost dishonest in its simplicity. Yet over time, something unexpected happened. The skills she had used in intelligence, listening carefully, reading emotional shifts, earning trust without force, made her a better teacher than she had ever been undercover. For the first time, those abilities served only one purpose. Occasionally, fragments of the past surfaced. A headline, a documentary speculation, a discussion that came close enough to truth to be uncomfortable, yet never close enough to matter. She learned to let those moments pass. Correcting the record was never part of the deal. Silence had been her weapon once, now it was her shield. Inside MOSSAD, her operation became a case study, not for its outcome, but for its method. Analysts emphasized the same lesson again and again. The most effective intelligence work did not look like intelligence at all. It looked like patience, like routine, like someone everyone trusted and no one remembered to question. Her name never appeared in those briefings. It didn't need to. Years later, when asked in a private setting whether she regretted anything, she paused longer than expected. Not because the answer was complicated, but because it was precise. She did not regret the mission. She regretted how easy it was for people to overlook the quiet forces shaping their lives. How danger was almost always imagined as loud, sudden, and visible, when in reality it moved softly, wearing familiar faces. The teacher disguise had worked because it exploited a universal assumption that care and threat could not coexist. That assumption had protected her better than any weapon ever could. In the end, she carried no trophies, no public recognition, and no story she could safely tell. What she carried instead was knowledge of how trust was built, how it could be used, and how fragile it truly was when placed in the wrong hands. And somewhere in a town that never knew what it had been part of, the school continued to open its doors every morning at the same time, unaware that one ordinary classroom had once been the quiet center of an operation that changed far more than anyone would ever realize.